You know that feeling you get when you unbox a watch and see it for the first time? It's like a surge of excitement going straight to your brain. For me, that split second really sets the tone for the whole experience I'll have with the watch. I instantly know if I'm gonna love it, if I'll need time to warm up to it, or if it's just not going to be for me. When I unboxed this Merkur Skin Diver, I don't really know what it was, but this watch had a certain je ne sais quoi to it. All I knew was that I really liked it. This watch sells for around $120 on AliExpress, but you'll probably be able to save a few dollars if you wait for one of the big AliExpress sales. Merkur has some of the best vintage inspired designs on AliExpress, and it seems like they've hit it out of the park with the design on this Skin Diver too. Like many of the other models, this watch has by now what has become their signature case design. It's an unassuming case that looks and wears great on the wrist, and the compact dimensions mean it's going to suit most wrist sizes out there. The case is entirely brushed. This gives it a toolish look and focuses your attention towards the dial, which is where the Merkur magic usually happens anyway. The brushing on the case looks decent, but the transitions don't really look that sharp or defined, especially when you zoom in. The drill lugs on this case are a nice touch. It makes it so much easier to change straps, and it really adds to that vintage look. There's a screw-in crown at the 10 o'clock position and a push-pull crown at 3 o'clock. Both of them are signed with nice engravings of the Merkur logo. It takes quite a bit of effort to pop the 3 o'clock crown out, but Merkur mentions this helps ensure the water resistance holds up. Speaking of which, there seems to be mixed water resistance rating on the Merkur listing. The listing states 100 meters, but some of the promo materials mention 80 meters. Either way, this is one skin diver I'd not recommend you to actually go skin diving with. The beautiful top hat crystal gives this watch a lovely vintage look. Like all Merkur watches I've reviewed, the crystal is made from K1 mineral. And like all those reviews, I'm going to say I wish they went with a sapphire crystal instead. I feel like I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but it's a job hazard I signed up for when I started reviewing watches. Scratch resistance aside, the crystal is incredibly clear and it does a great job of dealing with reflections, so it's not all bad. The inner dive time bezel is controlled by the screw down crown at 10 o'clock. It's a similar bidirectional bezel like the world timer I reviewed, but there's a small difference between the both of them. The bezel on the world timer felt completely smooth, but the bezel on this has very subtle clicks when you rotate it. I'm not sure how they did that, but it reminds me of the tactility of rotating an external dive bezel. And it goes to show that they're just not using the same mechanism for all of their watches. I couldn't really make out the exact number of clicks because they're so subtle, but it doesn't feel like 60 clicks or even 120 clicks. Make of that what you will. The printing on the bezel actually has small dots within the silvery paint. I only noticed this on the macro, and at first I thought it was bad printing, but the more I looked at it, I think they actually did this on purpose. You can't really see those small dots with the naked eye, but it actually gives the bezel markings a certain element of depth. Do you think that was something they were going for, or was it just bad printing? Let me know in the comments. The inner rotating bezel gives this dial a ton of depth, and the dial elements all seem to complement each other perfectly. The dial is a toolish matte black with minimal white text printed on it. Now, before you start commenting, lol, who's Manuel, or they spell anti-shock wrong, hear me out. What you're seeing here is French. You're probably wondering why a Chinese brand chose to have French words on the dial, and so did I, but it seems Merkur is homaging a vintage Yamaha design, so those French wordings suddenly make so much more sense. The date wheel on my unit wasn't exactly centered in the date window. The numbers appeared aligned towards the top, so that was something that constantly annoyed me. The hour and minute hand have a polished finish, but the second hand has a vertical brush pattern that goes along its entire length. You know how polished hands tend to disappear against the dial? Well, that's not a problem here, because the massive chunks of lume make them very legible, no matter what ambient lighting you're in. It's something that doesn't really seem like a big deal, but hand legibility is one of those quality of life improvements you don't know you're missing out on until you have a highly legible watch. The indices have a printed white border and they're filled with lume. The printing is very crisp, and judging from how raised the indices look, you can tell that Merkur applied a liberal layer of Lume to the indices, and that shows when you take this watch into a dark room. The Lume took me by surprise the first time I saw it. It glows really strong, which is impressive, considering that these are printed indices. The green Lume is evenly applied on the hands and indices, and it lasts all through the night. Merkur is using the custom Merkur M10D movement on this watch, which is a version of the popular Chinese standard movement. It's not the most accurate movement in the world, but it kept decent time over the course of a couple of weeks. The winding action feels really good and tactile, so you're probably going to love topping up the power reserve throughout the day, but just be cautious and don't overwind it. 20 turns in the morning lasted me the entire day, so I'd suggest starting from there and seeing if that works for you. This watch comes on a tan canvas strap. It feels robust, but it also feels comfortable against the wrist. The quick release spring bars are going to make strap changes really easy. It's a good strap overall, but I didn't like the tan color against the greenish hands and indices. I put the watch on a green autumn silk lot strap instead, and I really feel this combo took the watch to a whole other level. Which strap combo do you think works better? Let me know in the comments. So, what do I think about the Merkur Skin Diver? If you're looking for a vintage-inspired skin diver around $100, you're not going to find many better options than this. Honestly, this is probably my favorite Merkur to date, and that's saying something because I've reviewed quite a few of their watches on my channel. It's a handsome watch that ticks a lot of boxes, especially the dimensions and design. Now, it's not perfect by any means, and it doesn't have the best specs at this price point, but as I mentioned in the intro, it just has a certain je ne sais quoi to it, and that's not just because of the French print on the dial.